I'm Margaret, and this is the story of how I went from being invisible in my daughter's life to taking back control. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's one I think many of you will relate to. This all started at my daughter's bridal shower. I've always believed in being there for my family, especially my daughter, Amanda. She was everything to me. When she asked me to organize her bridal shower, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to make it perfect for her, and I had the means to do it. So, I paid for the venue, the flowers, the catering, every single detail. I wanted her to have the kind of celebration I never had for myself, and I thought it would mean something to her. But when the day came, things didn't feel right. I walked into the venue, feeling proud of the work I'd done. But the moment I stepped through the door, I could sense a shift. My daughter didn't even look up from her phone to greet me. I was met with polite nods from the guests, but nothing warm, nothing that said, "Thank you for everything you've done." It was as if I wasn't even there. The day I had worked so hard for suddenly felt like it wasn't for me at all. As I stood in the corner, I couldn't help but notice how everyone else was laughing, enjoying themselves and socializing, except me. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of the event, that maybe Amanda was overwhelmed, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. My presence seemed to be more of a nuisance than a comfort. I thought I could ignore the feeling, maybe it would pass. But then it came. My daughter, my only child, told me in front of everyone that I was too old to be in the pictures. She said I was just a distraction, that I didn't belong in the photos with the younger guests. I stood there trying to keep it together, but inside, it felt like my heart was breaking. I had spent so much time, so much money, so much love trying to make her day perfect, and here I was being told I wasn't welcome. It wasn't just a slap in the face, it was a revelation. I had spent years doing everything for her, sacrificing my own happiness to make sure she was okay. And yet, in that moment, I realized she no longer saw me as her mother. I was no longer the person she leaned on for support. Instead, I was just someone to be tolerated, someone who had outstayed her welcome. The rest of the shower went on without me. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the sidelines, watching as Amanda celebrated with everyone else, and I was nothing more than a shadow in the background. No thank you, no recognition, just nothing. When the event finally ended, I walked out of there with my head held high, but inside, I was devastated. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just one moment, that it didn't define me, but the truth was it did. I had been forgotten. I had been erased from my daughter's life, even in a moment that was supposed to be about family. But that day, something changed in me. I realized that I had been giving and giving, always trying to be there for her, always putting her needs before mine. And in doing so, I had lost myself. I had let myself be invisible for too long. It was time for me to make a choice I should have made years ago. I decided I wasn't going to let her or anyone else push me to the sidelines anymore. I wasn't going to allow myself to be treated like I didn't matter. I wasn't just a mother, a wife, a caretaker. I was a person with my own needs, my own voice, and my own worth. And from that moment on, I was going to reclaim my life, my boundaries, and my power. After the bridal shower, I was left with an overwhelming feeling of loneliness and confusion. How could my own daughter treat me like that? The hurt was deep. But what hurt even more was the realization that it wasn't just about the shower. It was a sign of something bigger. A pattern had formed over the years. My sacrifices, my love, my devotion, they had all gone unnoticed. I had poured everything into Amanda, thinking that one day it would matter, thinking that she would see it, appreciate it, and most of all, love me in return. But as I drove home that night, I knew the truth. It wasn't just about the shower. It was about everything that had led up to it. Years of always being there, always putting my family first, while my own needs and dreams were pushed aside. Amanda had grown, and with that growth, she had distanced herself from me. She was building her life with her new fiancé, and suddenly I was just an extra, someone who didn't quite fit anymore. The house felt empty when I got home. I stood there for a long time, looking at the walls, the photographs on the mantle. I'd spent so many years making sure Amanda had everything she needed. everything I never had as a young mother. I had worked double shifts, missed family vacations, put off my own dreams, all for her. And now here I was, left standing in the ruins of my own sacrifices. But instead of sinking deeper into despair, something inside me started to stir. The pain was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Something I couldn't quite describe at first. Anger? Maybe. But more than that, it was a quiet determination. I had spent so much time trying to make others happy, trying to make sure I was doing the right thing by everyone around me. But had anyone ever really asked what I needed? I hadn't allowed myself to ask that question in years. I had been so focused on my family that I had lost sight of my own worth. And that was the turning point for me. I knew I couldn't continue down this path. I couldn't keep being the person who was always there to pick up the pieces, to clean up the messes, to be the quiet one in the background. So, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I started to put myself first. The first step was small, no big declarations, no grand gestures, but it was important. I called the venue where the bridal shower had been held. I had already paid for everything, but I was done being pushed around, done being disrespected. I wasn't going to let this moment slide by without standing up for myself. When the event coordinator answered, I said simply, I need to cancel the venue. All of it. The entire event. It's no longer going ahead. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by questions about refunds and policies, but I didn't care. No refunds. No venue. I don't need to explain myself. Just cancel it, I said, my voice steady for the first time in what felt like years. I hung up the phone, and for a brief moment, I felt a surge of something powerful. It wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was clarity. It was the first time I had taken control of a situation in my life that was no longer serving me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally doing something for me. The days that followed weren't easy. Amanda tried calling me, but I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. I knew she wouldn't understand. After all, she was caught up in her own world, preparing for her wedding, excited about her new life. I couldn't fault her for that, but I wasn't going to let myself be the person and that was when I realized something important. The more I distanced myself from that toxic situation, the more I understood what it meant to take care of myself. For so long, I had been the person everyone else relied on. I was the rock, the caregiver, the silent supporter. But I had neglected my own needs for far too long. This was my wake-up call. I had been so focused on my daughter's happiness that I had forgotten my own. I had been so willing to make sacrifices for her, but in the process, I had lost who I was. And if I wanted to regain any sense of myself, I had to start setting boundaries, not just with Amanda, but with everyone in my life. I had to start saying no when it mattered. I spent the following weeks thinking deeply about my relationship with Amanda, and I knew something had to change. I wasn't going to keep being the person who always put others first. I wasn't going to be the person who quietly accepted disrespect. And most importantly, I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my daughter, define my worth for me anymore. That's when I realized it was time to let go. Let go of the idea that my value was tied to how much I did for others. Let go of the belief that love meant always sacrificing myself. And most importantly, I let go of the idea that my daughter would eventually see my worth. If she couldn't see it now, then maybe it was time for me to stop trying so hard to prove it. The weeks that followed were filled with silence. I didn't hear from Amanda for a while, and at first, I thought I might feel some sense of relief. But instead, I felt an emptiness I couldn't shake. It wasn't just that she hadn't reached out. It was that I had always been the one to reach out first. I had been the one who kept the communication flowing, who made sure everyone was okay. And now, for the first time, I wasn't the one initiating contact. The first week of silence felt like an eternity. I spent those days walking through my house, wondering where things had gone wrong, wondering what had happened to the connection I had with my daughter. I thought back to all the moments we'd shared, the times I had dropped everything to be there for her. School plays, doctor's appointments, endless nights of homework, all the sacrifices I made to ensure she had what she needed. I had been her mother, her protector, her guide. And yet, in one moment, it felt like I had become invisible to her. I couldn't help but wonder if she even missed me. But instead of wallowing in that feeling, something inside me snapped. I realized that I was spending far too much time thinking about her actions and not enough time thinking about my own. Why had I let myself get to this point? Why had I allowed myself to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? I began to look inward, reflecting on the choices I had made. For so long, I had believed that my value came from what I could give to others. I thought that being the one who sacrificed, who worked tirelessly, who loved without question would be enough. But it wasn't. And I had to face the hard truth. I had allowed myself to be diminished by the very people I had given everything to. It was time to start looking at my life differently. If Amanda didn't appreciate me, then it was time for me to start appreciating myself. So I made a decision. I started to take control of my finances, something I had neglected for years. I had always been the one who kept track of the family budget, who made sure the bills were paid, who saved for the future. But in the years of raising Amanda and caring for my family, I had pushed my own financial security to the back burner. It wasn't that I didn't care about my own future. I just thought there would always be time for it later. But now, I realized that later had to be now. I took a hard look at my savings account. The money I had set aside over the years was decent, but it wasn't nearly enough to give me the security I needed if something were to happen. I knew I needed to be smarter about how I managed my money. So I started reading books on personal finance, watching videos, and doing everything I could to educate myself. I wasn't just learning for the sake of learning. I was learning because I wanted to regain my independence. I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened with Amanda or anyone else, I would have the means to support myself and not rely on anyone else for help. But financial independence wasn't the only thing I needed to regain. I also needed to set boundaries. Boundaries that I had never really set before because I was always so eager to please, to help, to be there for everyone. I had always been the one people came to for support, but when it came time for me to ask for help, I was left on my own. I started small. The next time Amanda called, I didn't answer right away. I let it ring. And then, for the first time in a long while, I sent her a message instead of picking up the phone. It was a simple message. I'm taking some time for myself. I need space to think about things. I'll reach out when I'm ready. It felt strange at first. I was used to being the one who was always available. But the more I did it, the more I realized how much I needed this. I needed to stop being the one who always dropped everything for everyone else. I needed to start being the one who put myself first, even if that meant taking a step back from my daughter. The silence continued for weeks. Amanda reached out a few more times, but I didn't respond. I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply giving myself the space I needed to breathe. I wasn't going to be the person who was constantly at the mercy of someone else's whims. I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. One day, as I was sitting on the porch enjoying a quiet afternoon, I realized something. I was starting to feel like myself again. The pain of being ignored was still there, but it was no longer defining me. The more I focused on myself, the less I felt the need for validation from others. I started finding joy in the simple things again. Reading, painting, gardening, even just sitting in silence with my own thoughts. I was starting to rediscover who I was outside of being a mother, a caregiver, a giver. It wasn't about Amanda anymore. It was about me. And for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel like I deserved to take up space in my own life. The silence between Amanda and me stretched on, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill it. I knew it was hard for her, and in some ways it was hard for me, too. But I had made my decision. I was done being the person who bent over backwards for everyone else without ever asking for anything in return. And the more time passed, the more I realized just how much I had been sacrificing, not just for my family, but for the sake of being loved. In the quiet, I began to reflect on my own life. I had always been the one to keep everything together. The one who made sure everything was running smoothly, while my own needs were always pushed to the background. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking myself what I wanted, what I needed. It was a tough pill to swallow. but I had to accept that the love I had been giving wasn't always reciprocated. That didn't mean I had to stop loving. It meant I had to love myself. I knew it was time to take another step toward regaining my independence, not just emotionally, but financially. Over the past few weeks, I had been diving into personal finance, learning everything I could about investments, budgeting, and building a secure future for myself. I wasn't going to wait for anyone to take care of me anymore. I had spent too many years relying on the love and generosity of others. Now, I was going to build something that was entirely mine. I sat down one afternoon with all my bank statements, a notepad, and a calculator. I had a plan now, one that didn't include waiting around for someone else to see my worth. I needed to make sure I could support myself, whether or not Amanda came back into my life. I wanted financial freedom, the kind that didn't require asking for permission. It wasn't easy at first. The numbers on the page didn't add up to the security I needed. But I knew that every small step I took was a step toward reclaiming my future. Slowly but surely, I started setting aside more money, cutting unnecessary expenses, and investing in myself. As I worked on building my financial independence, I started making other changes in my life. I took up painting again. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in years. I'd given it up, telling myself I didn't have time, that there were always more important things to do. But now I was making time for it. I had always loved painting. It was my escape, my way of expressing emotions I couldn't always put into words. One evening, I sat down in front of a blank canvas and began to paint. The strokes were slow at first, unsure. But as I went on, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. With each brushstroke, I could feel my soul coming back to life. I wasn't just painting a picture. I was painting my own freedom, my own recovery. It wasn't just about the money, the independence, or the art. It was about reclaiming myself. I realized that I had been so consumed with pleasing others that I had forgotten how to please myself. And for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of that. Around that time, I got a message from Amanda. It had been weeks since I'd last heard from her, and the message was short. "Mom, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a while, unsure of what to do. Part of me felt like I should call her immediately, that this was the moment I'd been waiting for. The other part of me, the part that had been quietly building my strength, told me to wait, to not rush. I had spent so many years rushing to fix things, rushing to be the one who always had the answers. But this time, I wasn't going to do that. Instead of replying right away, I took a deep breath and put my phone down. I had learned the power of silence. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my next move. I was going to decide when and how I wanted to respond. The next day, I finally wrote back. "I'm open to talking, but on my terms." It was a small sentence, but it felt like a huge victory. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I wasn't begging for validation. I was letting Amanda know that things were different now. She called me the next afternoon. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but she tried to sound casual. "Hey, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm sorry for how things went down. I've just been really stressed with everything, and I guess I pushed you away without realizing it." It wasn't an apology like I had imagined, but it was enough. And in that moment, I realized I had no intention of forcing a relationship that wasn't ready to be mended. I didn't need her to beg for forgiveness. I just needed her to see that I wasn't the same woman anymore. The one who silently endured, the one who always put everyone else first. "I appreciate you saying that, Amanda, but I need you to know that I'm not going to be the same person I was. I'm working on myself now. I've spent too many years trying to make things work for everyone else. I have to focus on me now." The conversation was awkward, but it felt like a turning point. I wasn't waiting for Amanda to make everything right. I wasn't holding my breath, hoping she would come around. I had finally accepted that I had to live for me, regardless of what anyone else did. After that, we didn't talk much. She tried a few more times to reach out, but I stayed distant. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned that I had to protect my peace. I had to show myself the same love and respect I had always shown others. In the quiet moments, I realized something else. I wasn't just recovering from the hurt. I was growing. The woman who had once felt invisible The woman who had always been the silent one in the background was finally standing up for herself. And for the first time in years, I could hear my own voice. As the weeks passed, I found myself slipping into a new rhythm. Life, without the constant effort of trying to win approval or fight for recognition, felt strangely peaceful. The weight that had been bearing down on me for so many years was beginning to lift. I had stopped seeking validation from my daughter, my family, or anyone else for that matter. It was liberating. But the silence was still there, hanging between Amanda and me, a reminder of all that had been left unsaid. There were moments when I missed her, when I thought about the little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees, the girl who once called me mommy with such adoration in her eyes. But the woman who had taken her place, the woman who barely looked at me anymore, was not the same person. And I realized I couldn't keep chasing after a relationship that no longer existed. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, I thought back to the moment I had decided to cancel the bridal shower. I had questioned myself for a while. Was I being too harsh? Was I overreacting? But now, sitting there in the calm of my own home, I understood that it wasn't about the event. It wasn't about the shower or the money I had spent. It was about taking a stand. I had finally found the courage to put my own needs first, and that decision had set me on a path I could never turn back from. I wasn't just standing up to Amanda. I was standing up to years of conditioning that told me my worth was tied to how much I could give to others. I had spent my life living for my family, trying to prove that I was enough by being everything to everyone. And in the process, I had forgotten what it felt like to be me. But I was finding it again, little by little. It wasn't just about the finances or the boundaries I was setting. It was about rediscovering what made me happy. About waking up each day without the weight of obligation on my shoulders. I had started painting again, and that had brought me more peace than I'd imagined. It was an outlet for my emotions, my frustration, and my joy. Each brushstroke was a step closer to reclaiming my own identity. But even with all of this newfound strength, I knew that I couldn't ignore the fact that my relationship with Amanda had changed. The pain of being excluded from her wedding had been a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a wake-up call that forced me to stop giving so much of myself away. And yet, the desire to repair things lingered, even if I knew it would never be the same. One afternoon, as I was walking to the mailbox, I noticed a letter from Amanda's fiancé, Chad. I hadn't heard from him in months, and the letter felt out of place. It was addressed to me, and the handwriting on the envelope was familiar. My heart pounded in my chest as I tore it open, not knowing what to expect. Inside, there was a short note, typed on a piece of stationery with no return address. It read, "Margaret, I hope this finds you well. I know things have been strained between you and Amanda, but I want to apologize for my part in that. I know I haven't been the easiest person to get along with, and I can only imagine how much that hurt you. Amanda and I have been talking a lot about what happened, and I think it's time for us to all have a real conversation. I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted to reach out and let you know that I'm sorry. I hope we can find a way to move forward together." For a moment, I stood there, holding the letter in my hands, unsure of what to do with it. My first instinct was to throw it away, to cut ties completely, but something stopped me. There was a sincerity in his words that I couldn't ignore. Something that made me believe he was ready to make things right. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I had spent so much time holding on to the idea of what my relationship with Amanda should be. I had put my entire identity into being her mother, her support, her everything. But now, I was learning to let go of the expectations I had carried for so long. I realized that the only person I could truly control was myself. I sat down with the letter in my lap and thought long and hard. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken either. I had reached a place where I could see things clearly, and that was what mattered. I didn't need to fix everything. I didn't need Amanda to validate my worth. What I needed was to find peace within myself, regardless of what happened next. So I made a decision. I would respond, but not out of obligation. I would respond because I was ready to have an honest conversation, one where my feelings were just as important as theirs. I wasn't going to go back to being the woman who always sacrificed herself. I wasn't going to return to the person who felt invisible just to make everyone else comfortable. I took a deep breath and sat down at my kitchen table, where I had written so many letters over the years, pouring my heart out in silence. This time, I wrote a letter to Amanda and Chad, just the two of them. I appreciate your apology, Chad. I'm glad you reached out. But I need you to understand something. I've been invisible for too long. I've spent years pouring my love into this family, into Amanda, and for the first time, I'm choosing to love myself. That means setting boundaries, and that means not accepting anything less than respect. If we are to move forward, it has to be on equal terms. As I wrote those words, I felt a weight lift from my chest. This wasn't about getting back what I'd lost. It was about claiming what I'd almost forgotten I deserved. My dignity, my respect, my voice. I mailed the letter the next day, and then I let go of the outcome. The days that followed were quiet. After I sent the letter, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because I had finally spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and anxiety because I didn't know how Amanda and Chad would respond. Would they understand? Would they be angry? Would they push me away even more? But that was the thing. I realized I couldn't control their reactions anymore. I had spent so many years trying to keep everything running smoothly, trying to fix things for others, that I had neglected my own needs. It was time to let go of the constant worry. I had already given so much to them, to everyone in my life. Now, I had to focus on myself. I didn't expect a quick reply. I had learned that change, especially in relationships, takes time. What mattered now was that I had finally taken control of my own life and stopped being the person who always came last. A week later, I was in my studio, putting the final touches on a painting I'd been working on for days. It was an abstract piece, colorful and chaotic, much like the emotions that had been swirling inside me for so long. As I stood back to take it all in, my phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated before picking it up. The number was from Amanda's fiancé, Chad. I had to take a deep breath before answering. Hello, Margaret. Chad's voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. I just wanted to let you know that Amanda read your letter. We've talked a lot about it, and I think we both understand where you're coming from now. We want to meet with you if you're ready. We'd like to talk. In person. I sat there for a moment, feeling a wave of emotions hit me. Part of me wanted to say no, to hold onto the new life I was building for myself without needing approval or validation from them. But another part of me, the part that still loved my daughter, felt a small hope stirring in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of a new chapter. I'm open to talking, I said, my voice steady but calm. But I need to be clear. This has to be on my terms. No more pretending. I won't go back to the way things were. If we're going to move forward, it has to be real. Chad agreed, and we set a time to meet. The moment I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I had made it clear that I wasn't willing to accept anything less than honesty and respect. And now I would have to show myself, that I could follow through on that commitment. The day of the meeting, I spent hours preparing. I dressed in a way that made me feel strong, comfortable, and unapologetically myself. I didn't want to look like the woman I used to be, the one who tried too hard to fit in, who always bent to everyone's will. I wanted to show them the woman I was becoming, the one who valued herself enough to stand tall, to speak her truth, and to not be afraid of what came next. When I arrived at the cafe where we agreed to meet, I spotted Amanda and Chad immediately. Amanda was sitting with her head down, looking uncomfortable, while Chad was staring at his phone. They looked so much like the couple I'd seen at the bridal shower, distant and focused on their own world, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the hurt they'd caused me. I took a deep breath and walked up to the table. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Amanda looked up, her eyes softening as they met mine. There was an awkward pause before she spoke. Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I've been thinking a lot about what you wrote, and I realize I've been selfish. I took you for granted, and that's not fair. I want to fix this. Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. There was no denying the sincerity in her voice. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. I appreciate that, Amanda, I said, my voice steady but calm. But this isn't just about what you did at the bridal shower or what happened between us. This is about years of me losing myself, trying to make you happy, trying to prove I was enough. And it's about me finally realizing that I can't do that anymore. I can't keep pouring from an empty cup. If we're going to have a real relationship, I need you to understand that. Chad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I didn't let that distract me. This wasn't just about Amanda. It was about all of us. I know, Amanda said, nodding. And I get that now. I've been so caught up in my own life that I didn't even see how much you'd given. How much you've sacrificed for me. I'm sorry. I want to be a better daughter to you. I just don't know how to fix it all. We sat there for a while, talking. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of uncomfortable silences. But it was real. For the first time in years, we were talking honestly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being heard. By the time we finished our conversation, I realized something. I wasn't going to get everything I wanted from this meeting. I wasn't going to fix the past in one conversation. But what mattered was that I had finally started standing up for myself, that I was starting to see my own worth, and that Amanda and Chad were finally starting to see it too. As I left the cafe, I felt a quiet sense of peace. The conversation hadn't been perfect, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. But for the first time, I felt like I had taken a step toward healing, not just with them, but with myself. In the weeks following our meeting, things began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. I didn't expect a sudden resolution, or for everything to go back to the way it had been. I knew that kind of healing would take time, but I felt a quiet strength building within me, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to fix everything. I was letting things unfold as they were meant to, without trying to force the outcome. Amanda and I didn't talk every day. In fact, there were times when days or even weeks would pass without us speaking. But that was okay. The space I had created for myself was allowing me to heal, and I knew that sometimes distance was necessary. However, there were moments when the weight of everything would hit me. A small comment or an old memory would surface, and the hurt would flare up again. I had learned to live with it, but it didn't make it any easier. The emotional scars weren't something that could be wiped away with a few heartfelt words. But I had changed. I had learned to stop trying to fill the emptiness with other people's approval. I had learned that healing wasn't linear, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be with your pain and let it pass. One afternoon, a few months after our meeting, I found myself walking through the grocery store, lost in my thoughts. I hadn't been to the store in a while, but I found myself heading straight for the aisle where Amanda and I used to shop together. I could almost see her. Her face lit up with excitement as she tossed items into the cart, asking me 100 questions about the best kind of cheese or which brand of pasta we liked most. The nostalgia hit me hard. I stopped in the aisle and stared at the shelves, the memories flooding back. I didn't know if I missed the idea of her, or if I really missed the daughter I once knew. The reality of where we were now, of how far we had drifted apart, was a bitter pill to swallow. But instead of letting the sadness take over, I took a deep breath and walked away. I had learned that I didn't need to carry the weight of the past anymore. I didn't need to drag it with me like a heavy chain. I wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay, but I also wasn't going to let it define me. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my tea and staring at the blank canvas in front of me, I thought about how much had changed. I thought about the woman I had been before, always giving, always sacrificing, always expecting that my worth would come from how much I did for others. But now, I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who had learned to love herself, someone who had learned to value her own happiness. And then the phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Amanda. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to hold on to the distance, to keep that wall in place so that I wouldn't get hurt again. But then I remembered what I had promised myself, that I wasn't going to run away from things that mattered. I wasn't going to hide from the hard conversations anymore. I answered the phone. "Hi, Mom." Amanda's voice was soft, and there was an uncertainty in it that I hadn't heard in a long time. I've been thinking about everything, and I just wanted to say thank you for giving me space, for not giving up on me. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I didn't say anything at first. I just let her words sink in. They were the words I had been waiting to hear, the words I had hoped for, but never forced. The apology wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase everything that had happened, but it was a start. A real, sincere start. I'm glad you called, I said, finally finding my voice. I know things have been difficult between us, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have. And I want us to figure this out at our own pace without rushing. We don't have to fix everything at once. There was a long pause, and then Amanda spoke again, her voice a little stronger this time. I agree. I've realized I've taken a lot for granted. I've been so focused on my own life that I forgot about you. And I'm sorry for that, Mom. The tears I had been holding back finally fell, but they were different this time. They weren't tears of anger or frustration. They were tears of release, of letting go, of finally feeling like I was being seen for who I was, not just as a mother, but as a woman. We'll take it one step at a time, I said, my voice steady, though my heart felt lighter. There's no rush. We have time. After a long conversation that felt like a new beginning, we ended the call. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew it wouldn't be. But something had shifted. It wasn't about forgiving her. It was about forgiving myself. I had spent so long holding on to the hope of a perfect relationship, a perfect family. But life wasn't perfect. People weren't perfect. And that was okay. I had learned that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It doesn't always come with grand gestures or apologies. Sometimes it's about meeting each other where we are and choosing to move forward with the understanding that we all make mistakes. And sometimes it's about letting go of the past and embracing the possibility of something new. As I sat there, staring at the canvas in front of me, I realized that I had finally found peace, not in a relationship that had once defined me, but in the woman I had become. The woman who knew her worth, who wasn't afraid to set boundaries, and who was learning to live for herself. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. The weeks that followed Amanda's call were a strange, bittersweet kind of peace. We didn't have long, emotional conversations every day, but we spoke more often, checking in, sharing small updates about our lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I felt like we were both finding our way back to each other, slowly but surely. But for me, the real breakthrough wasn't just in our conversations or the tentative steps toward rebuilding our relationship. The real change was happening within myself. I realized that I had been so consumed with trying to fix things, fixing my relationship with Amanda, fixing my past mistakes, fixing everyone else's problems, that I hadn't taken the time to fix myself. I hadn't taken the time to explore who I was outside of being a mother, a caregiver, a daughter. And now, I was finally learning to live for me. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, and flipping through a notebook I had started a few months earlier. It was a journal, my journal, and I had poured my heart into it. It wasn't just a place for me to vent or process my thoughts. It was a place for me to reflect on who I was becoming. I read through a few pages, stories of my past, things I had never told anyone. I had written about the sacrifices I'd made, the struggles I'd faced, and the love I had given, often to people who didn't understand how much it had cost me. But there, in the margins of the pages, were the small seeds of hope that I hadn't seen before. There were things I had forgotten about myself, things that had once mattered to me. I had written about my love for painting, about how I used to dream of traveling, about the books I used to devour in one sitting. I had written about the woman I used to be, the woman who had passions, dreams, and aspirations of her own, long before the roles of mother, wife, and caretaker had consumed me. And as I read those words, something clicked. I realized that I was more than just a mother, more than just someone who gave endlessly. I was me, and I had spent so long giving everything away that I had forgotten how to just be. I put the journal down and sat in silence, reflecting on what that meant. What did it mean to be me again? What did I want for my future? What dreams had I abandoned along the way? And how could I start pursuing them again? I started small, taking painting classes at a local studio. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the time for. Now I was making time. It wasn't about becoming a famous artist or turning it into a career. It was about rediscovering the joy of creating, the feeling of bringing something to life with my hands. The classes were humbling at first. I wasn't the best artist in the room, and my paintings didn't look anything like the ones hanging in galleries. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I was doing something for me. I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I wasn't doing it for validation or recognition. I was doing it because it made me feel whole again. In those classes, I met people who were on their own journeys, women my age, many of them older, some of them retirees, some of them still working in other careers, but all of us searching for something more. And in that space, I began to feel like I wasn't alone. There were so many of us at different stages of life, looking for new beginnings. Some were reconnecting with old passions, some were learning new skills, and some were simply trying to figure out what life meant for them now. But what mattered was that we were all learning to live for ourselves for the first time in years. And that shared sense of empowerment was contagious. A few weeks later, I made a decision. I was going to take a trip, a real one by myself. I had always dreamed of traveling, but the responsibilities of raising Amanda, taking care of my family, and putting others first had kept me grounded. But now, I felt ready to step outside of my comfort zone, to do something just for me. I chose a small town in Italy. It was a place I had read about in a travel book years ago, a place where people still lived slowly, where the sun warmed the streets and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. It wasn't a luxurious destination. It was just a quiet, peaceful place where I could disconnect from everything and truly reflect on who I was becoming. The thought of going on my own excited me and terrified me all at once. But I knew I had to do it. I wasn't doing it to escape my problems or to run away from my life. I was doing it because I had spent so many years living for others, and it was time to live for me. When I told Amanda about my plans, she was surprised, but supportive. "I think it's great, Mom," she said, her voice warm. "You deserve it." It felt good to hear those words. They weren't just words of approval, they were words of respect. For the first time, I felt like Amanda truly saw me, not just as her mother, but as a woman with her own life and her own dreams. I spent the next few weeks preparing for my trip, planning the itinerary, booking flights, finding places to stay. It felt liberating to be in control of my own decisions. I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I was doing it for myself. The morning of my departure, I stood at the airport, my passport in hand, and took a deep breath. There were no tears, no second thoughts. I felt strong, confident, and ready. This wasn't just a trip to Italy. It was the first step in a new chapter of my life, a chapter where I lived for myself, unapologetically and without guilt. As the plane lifted off the ground, I looked out the window at the city below, knowing that I was on my way to something new. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The days in Italy passed slowly and beautifully, each one feeling like a gift I was unwrapping for myself. I spent my mornings walking through cobblestone streets, exploring quaint shops and local markets, sipping coffee in small cafes where the locals greeted me with a warm smile. I felt like I was finally breathing again, breathing in the scent of freedom, of possibility. Each day, I found something new to fall in love with. The way the sunlight cast golden hues over the countryside in the late afternoon. The sound of the church bells ringing in the distance. The laughter of children playing in the square. And at night, as I sat in the small restaurant by the piazza, I felt an immense sense of peace. It was the first time in years that I wasn't rushing to meet a deadline or worrying about someone else's needs. I wasn't a mother, a caregiver, or a daughter. I was simply a woman, alone, but content in her own company. I had forgotten how much I loved to travel, how much I loved to explore the world without anyone else's expectations or needs weighing me down. The more time I spent in this small town, the more I realized that I had been living in the shadows of others for so long. But now I was living for me, and it felt right. It felt whole. One afternoon, I was sitting at a cafe when I met an older woman, about my age, who was traveling solo as well. Her name was Clara, and she had the most radiant smile. We started talking about the beauty of the town, and then about life, about how we had both come to this point in our lives where we were finally prioritizing ourselves, doing things that made us happy after years of putting everyone else first. I've been traveling like this for a few years now, Clara said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. After my husband passed away, I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to make me happy. I had to make it happen for myself. Her words resonated deeply with me. I hadn't been waiting for someone else to make me happy, but I had been waiting for permission to live for myself. I had spent so many years holding on to guilt, feeling that if I put myself first, I was being selfish. But Clara showed me that it wasn't selfish, it was necessary. It was a way of honoring yourself, of living fully, and of embracing the life you still had ahead of you. Life doesn't end when you hit a certain age, Clara continued. In fact, it's just beginning in some ways. There's so much left to experience. I had always been taught to think of the later years of life as a time of slowing down, of settling into routine, of preparing for the end. But Clara was showing me that it didn't have to be that way. The later years could be a time of growth, exploration, and reinvention. And I had just started to scratch the surface. That evening, as I sat on the balcony of my little rented apartment, watching the sunset over the hills, I thought about what Clara had said. I thought about how many times I had put my life on hold, waiting for the right moment or for someone else to give me permission. But I realized now that the right moment had always been here. It had been here all along, waiting for me to seize it. As I sat there reflecting on my journey, I also thought about Amanda. Our relationship was still fragile, still healing. But I knew that this time apart had given us both the space to grow. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't holding on to bitterness or resentment. I had let that go. The woman I was now was different from the woman I had been when I was focused on being the perfect mother, the perfect caretaker. I was learning to love myself, to forgive myself, and to let go of the guilt that had kept me trapped for so long. The next morning, as I was sitting at the cafe, sipping my espresso, I received a message from Amanda. It was a short text, but it was enough. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I hope we can continue to rebuild our relationship, but I respect your space and your time. I'm here when you're ready. I read the message a few times, letting it sink in. There were no grand apologies, no immediate fixes, but there was acknowledgement, there was recognition, and there was respect. For the first time in a long time, Amanda was seeing me not just as her mother, but as a person who was worthy of respect, worthy of love, and worthy of taking up space in her own life. I smiled, feeling a tear slip down my cheek, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was one of release, of finally letting go of the weight I had been carrying for so long. I wasn't waiting for Amanda to make everything right. I was making it right for myself. I was learning to set boundaries, to love myself, and to stop apologizing for putting myself first. I texted Amanda back. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you too. Let's take this one step at a time. No rush. And just like that, I knew that the healing was happening. Not all at once, and not in the way I had expected, but it was happening. As I returned home from Italy, I felt lighter, more grounded, more me. The time I spent in that small town, alone and unburdened, had given me clarity. I had learned to embrace the quiet, to be comfortable with myself, and to stop apologizing for taking up space. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I wasn't hiding from my past or my mistakes. I was stepping into the future with all its uncertainties, with an open heart and an open mind. The moment I walked through my front door, I felt the familiar weight of home settle around me. It was still my space, my sanctuary, but now it felt different. It felt like a place of possibility rather than a place of obligation. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about all the ways I had neglected myself in the past. How many opportunities had I passed up because I didn't think I deserved them? How many dreams had I pushed aside because I thought my role as a mother, a wife, a caretaker, was all that defined me. But now I knew better. I knew that my worth wasn't tied to what I did for others. My worth was in who I was, and I had spent far too many years forgetting that. Amanda and I spoke a few more times while I was in Italy, each conversation feeling a little easier, a little more authentic. She wasn't perfect and neither was I, but there was a mutual respect growing between us, one I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't asking her for apologies or explanations anymore. I wasn't holding on to the pain of the past. I was learning to move forward to allow both of us the grace to grow. One afternoon, Amanda called me, and we talked for over an hour. We spoke about everything, her plans for the wedding, her career, her new life with Chad. But we also spoke about us, about how we had both changed, how we were both learning new ways to relate to one another. I wasn't her everything anymore, and that was okay. I had come to understand that it was healthy for both of us to have space to live our own lives. I think we're finally getting it, Mom, Amanda said, her voice soft but steady. We're learning to be ourselves, apart from each other, and still be connected. I don't need you to fix everything. I just need you to be you. The woman who's figuring out her own life, just like I'm figuring out mine. I smiled, feeling a rush of pride. This wasn't an apology. It wasn't the grand reconciliation I had once imagined, but it was real, and it was enough. For the first time, I felt like Amanda truly saw me, not as her mother who was supposed to be perfect, but as a person who was allowed to have flaws, to have dreams, and to live a life outside of her role as a mother. As the weeks went by, I began to rebuild my own life, not as a shadow of someone else, but as Margaret, the woman I had always been but had forgotten. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always wanted to do, but had never made time for. I started writing, not just journaling, but telling my stories, the ones I had kept hidden, the ones that shaped me into who I was. It was cathartic, and it helped me process everything I had been through, everything I had survived. I began to find a new sense of purpose, not in the things I did for others, but in the things I did for myself. I had been so focused on being the caregiver, the fixer, the one who always put others first, that I had lost sight of who I was. But now I was building a new life, one that was solely mine. Then one evening, as I was sitting at my desk, typing away at my latest story, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I hesitated. But then I stood up and walked to the door, my heart skipping a beat as I opened it. It was Amanda. She stood there, holding a bouquet of flowers, her face a little nervous but full of sincerity. I thought I'd bring you something, she said, handing me the flowers. I know we're not where we used to be, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for letting me find my own way, and for showing me that it's okay to take care of myself. I think I'm finally understanding that, and I'm so grateful for you. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the apology, the understanding, the connection I had always hoped for. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. We didn't need to fix everything. We just needed to accept that both of us were growing, both of us were learning, and both of us were trying. I'm proud of you, Amanda, I said, my voice steady. And I'm proud of me too. She smiled and hugged me, the bouquet of flowers between us. It wasn't the picture-perfect moment I had once imagined, but it was real, and it was beautiful in its own way. As she left that evening, I felt a sense of closure, both for the past and for the future. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. What mattered was that we were both moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I was too. The months after Amanda's visit were a mixture of quiet growth and quiet joy. I wasn't rushing to prove anything to anyone anymore. I wasn't worried about whether people saw me as a good mother or a good wife, because I had stopped seeking validation from others. I had become someone who knew her worth, not because of what I did for others, but because of who I was at my core. And that feeling, that sense of deep self-respect, was something I hadn't known in a long time. I spent my days writing, painting, and walking through life with a slower, more intentional pace. There were no grand, dramatic moments. There were no awards or recognitions to mark my progress, but I didn't need that anymore. I had found peace in the quiet moments, I found joy in the little things, like the way the light danced on the leaves of the trees outside my window, or the feeling of paint on my fingertips, or the quiet hum of my pen as I wrote my thoughts on paper. I began to realize that these small, seemingly insignificant moments were what made life beautiful. They were the pieces of life that I had overlooked for so long, the pieces that had always been there, waiting for me to see them. One afternoon, I sat on my porch, sipping a cup of tea and watching the sun set. It was a moment of peace, a moment of reflection, and I was suddenly struck by how far I had come. There was a time when I felt invisible, like I had no voice, like I was only a mother and nothing more. But now I was me, and that was enough. I had let go of the past and embraced the future, not with fear, but with excitement for what was to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I received a call from Amanda. It wasn't one of those long, heavy conversations we'd once had, no more apologies or discussions about what had gone wrong. Instead, it was light, casual. She told me about a new project at work, about how she had started taking yoga classes, about the new recipe she was trying for dinner that night. It wasn't extraordinary, but in its simplicity, it was everything I needed. We were talking, and not just talking about the past or the weight of everything we had been through. We were sharing our lives. When she finished telling me about her day, there was a pause before she said, "Mom, I know we've been through a lot, and I know it's still not perfect. But I just want to say thank you for letting me find my own way, for not trying to fix everything anymore." I felt a warmth spread through me, a kind of quiet joy. "You don't have to thank me, Amanda," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I've always wanted you to find your own way. I just had to let you do it in your own time without pushing." We talked for a while longer about nothing and everything, and by the time we hung up, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. We weren't perfect, and our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. For both of us, over the next few months, I continued to build my life. I started teaching a weekly painting class at the local community center. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about sharing something I loved with others, about showing them that it was never too late to try something new. And the class was small, just a handful of people, many of them older like me, but it was fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. I found joy in seeing others rediscover their own creativity, their own passions. It felt like a full circle, like I was giving back the same way I had been given to, but this time it was on my terms. Amanda and I saw each other more often too. We had dinner together, went to the farmer's market, took walks. It was simple, but it was what we needed. We didn't need to fix the past. We just needed to keep moving forward, one day at a time, with no expectations, just the desire to truly be with each other. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the stars come out, I thought about all that had changed. I had spent so much of my life believing that I had to give everything for others, that I had to be selfless and invisible in order to be loved. But now I knew the truth I was worthy of. Love because I was me. Not because I was a perfect mother or a perfect person, but because I had learned to accept myself, flaws and all. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. It was a part of who I was, yes, but it didn't define me. I had learned to let go of the idea that I had to fix everything or everyone. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and moving forward, one step at a time. And as I sat there surrounded by the quiet of the night, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything I had been through, for the struggles, for the pain, for the lessons, because without them, I wouldn't be the woman I was today. And that woman, this woman, was finally free. As I sat on the porch, wrapped in the calm of the evening, I realized how far I had come. The woman I had once been, the one who lived for others, who gave until there was nothing left for herself, was no longer the woman sitting here now. The woman sitting here was someone who had learned to set boundaries, who had embraced her own worth, and who had finally, after years of silence, found her voice. Life was no longer about being perfect. It was no longer about being the caretaker, the fixer, the one who sacrificed everything. I had stopped trying to please everyone and started to please myself. I had learned that I wasn't just a mother, a wife, or a daughter. I was Margaret. I was me. And for the first time, that was enough. My relationship with Amanda was still growing. It was different now, less about fixing the past and more about accepting it. There were no grand declarations of forgiveness, no magical moments that made everything perfect. But there was peace, and sometimes that peace was all we needed. We were finding our way together, slowly but surely, without the pressure of perfection, just the desire to be there for each other, without expectation. I thought about the time I had spent in Italy, and how much that time had given me. It wasn't just the stunning landscapes or the quiet moments of solitude. It was the space it had given me to rediscover who I was. I wasn't running away from my life. I was running toward it, toward a new chapter that I had been too afraid to open. I was no longer waiting for permission from anyone to live my life. I was living it on my own terms. There were days when the memories of the past would come rushing back, of being left out, of feeling invisible, of watching as others moved on without me. But I didn't let those memories control me anymore. They were a part of me, yes, but they didn't define me. I had learned that healing was a journey, and that journey wasn't linear. Some days were easier than others, but the important thing was that I was still moving forward. The most important lesson I had learned was that self-love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about being flawless or always getting it right. It was about accepting yourself, flaws and all, and knowing that you are worthy of love, happiness, and respect. It was about giving yourself permission to live fully, unapologetically, without constantly seeking approval from others. I had spent so many years putting my family first, always sacrificing for their happiness, always telling myself that I had to be everything for them. But I had learned that I didn't have to lose myself in the process. I could still be a mother, a friend, a daughter, without losing the woman I had been before those roles defined me. I could still love fiercely, but I could also love myself. And as I sat there, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought me to this moment. The struggles, the pain, the quiet victories. They had all led me here, to this place of peace, to this place of me. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. I had spent too long living for everyone else, too long pretending that my worth came from what I did for others. But now I knew better. I knew that my worth was inherent in who I was, and that knowledge gave me the freedom to live my life as I saw fit, without guilt, without fear, and with the strength to stand up for myself. And as the night air grew cooler and the sound of crickets filled the silence, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time, I truly understood that it didn't need to be. Life wasn't about achieving some ideal version of myself. It was about embracing the imperfect, messy, beautiful reality of who I was. And in that, I had found my peace.